Hi, I'm Kristyn Hodgden, IVF mom, proud women's health advocate, and co-founder of Rescripted.
And I'm Dr. Jenna Khan, a board certified OBGYN, fertility specialist, and mom of two.
And from first period to last period, we're diving into the women's health topics that matter most, from periods and fertility to pregnancy and menopause.
Through expert interviews and candid conversations, we're empowering women to take charge of their health by expanding the discussion beyond what's typically covered in the doctor's office.
It's time to stop guessing when it comes to our health. Now let's dive in for the real science-backed info you need to be the expert in you. Hi everyone, welcome back to From First Period to Last Period. It's been a minute because I finally gave birth to my baby boy in December. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. It's a new year. It's 2025. I'm up one kid. I feel like a totally different human than I did the last time we spoke. So, what's going on?
It's been a crazy intro to 2025. It's been really busy here, but I am so excited to hear about all that you've been up to. Certainly busy in a different way than me.
Well, your Eagles won the Super Bowl. That's exciting.
Oh my gosh, I know Philly was crazy, and I'm sort of like a fair weather fan. I don't totally get into it until we're like really doing well, and it was really exciting. It was some great games.
That's awesome. So, diving right in, this week, her story unfiltered is going to look a little different. Usually, we kind of have call-ins from our guests with their women's health stories, but since I'm sure some of you are curious, I'm going to be sharing my birth story for the first time, which I have to say, Jenna, was such an incredibly healing experience for me. So if you've ever wondered about what makes someone a good candidate for a VBAC or what questions to ask your doctor, this episode is definitely for you. And then in Own Your Health, Jenna's going to tackle some of your most burning questions about fertility and cycles, like how soon can you get pregnant after stopping birth control? And lastly, in Women's Health in the Wild, we're going to dive into the growing problem of disappearing reproductive health information and share some practical ways to stay informed and make sure you have access to the facts you need. Her Story Unfiltered, raw, real, and rescripting women's health, one powerful story at a time. Yeah, let's get into it. So what have I been up to? um, so the reason I wanted to share my birth story is because it just went so differently this time around than it did with my twins. I think I've shared on the podcast before that, I had a really high risk twin pregnancy. I birthed my daughter, twin A, vaginally, and twin B was my son, was an emergency C-section. So kind of a double whammy, which I've written about on our site before, if you want to, read more into that. But I had a VBAC this time.
Which is so awesome.
Yeah, and I remember texting you or even chatting with you, when we recorded last about, like, how I was hoping for a VBAC, but I really didn't wanna have an emergency C-section, and I actually had a scheduled C-section planned for December 21st, and it felt like the safest choice after everything I had been through, but then, as my pregnancy sort of progressed, different providers at my OB's office kept telling me that they thought I would be a good candidate for a VBAC since I had already delivered vaginally and that, twins was a whole different ballgame and that this was a completely different pregnancy and delivery. So I decided that if I went into labor naturally before my scheduled C-section, I would go for it. And then at 38 weeks, I was already 4 centimeters dilated at my appointment. So my OB stripped my membranes to help things along. And I was in the hospital by 8 a.m. the next morning.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Was it
So,
quick?
so and I'm sure you have insight into this, but basically I got there at like 8 a.m. And my doctor checked me and she said I was already 5 centimeters, but I wasn't like, I guess I was in like early active labor, but I wasn't like fully, obviously about to push at that point. And she said, like, do we want to go for it? Because she knew about my fears, she knew about my medical history. And at that point, I did kind of get cold feet because, again, goal was like a healthy baby and healthy mom, and I didn't want to chance an emergency C-section. I was like, I'd rather have a scheduled C-section than an emergency one.
For sure.
But she kind of walked me through the whole entire day, how it would go. Like, she was like, we'll go like slow and low on Pitocin. We'll give you the epidural and then we'll break your water, which kind of sounded like counterintuitive to me. But she said because I had given birth vaginally before that I could potentially go things could progress too quickly if they broke my water too soon, and then I might not be able to get the epidural. So I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, we don't want that." Having a provider that walked me through everything, right at the start and kind of, like, told me what to expect was such a game changer because I felt like the last time around I mean, on my whole journey, like, through infertility, through pregnancy, through birth, like, everything was hindsight is 2020, and I feel like that happens too often in women's health, and this time it was like, "No, I see you. I know that you're scared. You have every right to be. You've had a traumatic experience before. Like, this is how it's gonna go, and we're not gonna go too we're not gonna, like, move things along too quickly. It's gonna be very measured, and at any point, you can tell me when to stop and when to, like, go with the C-section." So that just, like, gave me such peace of mind, and, I would say I went in at 8 and I had him at 8:21 PM, so and once I was 10 centimeters, I think it was, like, 5 to 7 contractions, she said that, like, he was out.
Amazing.
Yeah. So Danny was born, on December 18th. He was 8 pounds, which I couldn't believe, and
I'm
everyone
sure that's much different than your twins.
Yeah, well, they were 5 and 6, but yeah, I mean, with my twins I didn't get that moment, and I know not everyone does, and I know that, like, things could have done differently this time too, but, like, I never had that moment of, like, meeting my babies, like, right after they were born because I had the emergency C-section, and I ended up, like, passing out and needing a blood transfusion, and, like, I could go on, and this time, my doctor literally on my last push I didn't realize it was my last push, but she goes, "Kristen, reach down," and she let me grab him and pull him
Oh,
onto my
I have the
chest.
chills. I love that.
I was literally like, I can't believe that just happened, and, you know and then just, like, being in the delivery room after, not having, you know, to worry about, like, what's going on around me. I don't know, it was just so it was really healing and really cool, and I feel like a good lesson to the fact that, like, things can go differently the next time around. Like, it's even with infertility, and I'm sure your patients, you see this all the time, but, like, just because one transfer fails doesn't mean that the next one will, and,
For
like, I
sure.
feel like when you're used to infertility, it can feel like
You're, like, waiting for the other shoe to drop, like, waiting for the
always,
bad news to come, yeah.
always, always, and, like, in therapy, I've had to, like I've kind of realized that, like, every time I hit another milestone in my pregnancy, I was, like, worried about the next milestone, and even now that he's here, it's like you worry about this and that, but not like, sometimes things do work out.
Yeah.
And thinking I was thinking back about how last January I was going through a fresh egg retrieval, which I never thought that I would have to do again because I ended my last IVF cycle with the twins with, like, 9 embryos, and none of them ended up working, and then I'm, like, back at the beginning, but it's only been a year, and, look, I have a baby now, so it's, kind of a testament to how so much can happen in a year, which is pretty cool.
That is so true.
Mhm. So I wanted to kind of because this is something that I didn't know. I kind of assumed that if you'd had a C-section before, you, like, really weren't a good candidate for a vaginal birth, and that's why I was so scared, I think, but then having providers that really walked me through, like, "No, you actually are a good candidate." Can you kinda go into,
Yeah,
how
for
to know
sure.
if you're a good candidate for I guess it's called a TOLAC,
Yeah.
right?
No, I'll definitely dive into that. So, but first I wanna just address that, like, you know, I think the first things first is, like, if you're interested in trying for labor, which so a TOLAC is trial of labor after a C-section. If you're interested in that, you wanna find a provider that feels comfortable doing that. And, I trained in an environment where we did a lot of we had a lot of patients TOLACing. Um, but I've heard just, being in practice, through friends and through patients, where they've had providers who weren't comfortable in that. And not just for their their own personal history, the patient's personal history, but um, just that wasn't part of their practice. And so there's a lot of good data around trial of labor after C-section, having a VBAC and ways to counsel patients. And if you don't have someone who feels comfortable,
Yeah.
um, you know, coaching you through a trial of labor, then I encourage you to try and find someone that does, because there's a lot of, especially like in academic centers, big hospitals, those are, great places to try that. Like, a little bit into the alphabet soup of OBGYN, TOLAC, again, trial of labor after C-section, and then a successful TOLAC is then called a VBAC, which is a vaginal birth after C-section. And, having a VBAC is associated with decreased maternal morbidity. It's an easier recovery after the delivery, but a failed trial of labor, meaning like an unplanned C-section after like going through labor, is actually much higher risk than a planned C-section.
Yeah.
So, like in order of like risk, it's like the least risky is like a successful VBAC. The second is a planned C-section, and the third is an unplanned C-section after a failed trial of labor. And so, really assessing the likelihood of success of a VBAC for each person is really important in like determining who's an appropriate candidate to try labor.
Mhm.
Um, and deciding who's the most appropriate candidate sort of also comes with weighing the risk of what is the most the biggest complication of a TOLAC, which is uterine rupture. And so, uterine rupture after having one prior C-section is pretty rare. It's like 1 to 2%. And so, there's a couple other things that if you that go into play with calculating this risk. How many C-sections you've had, other incisions on the uterus, like if you've had a prior fibroid surgery, um, go into this risk. But as long as your risk is like less than 1 to 2%, then you are potentially a candidate to TOLAC. Um, and then, like, also then going into probability of successful VBAC, like, you know, first you assess risk of rupture, and then, probability of VBAC. There's actually some really good calculators out there that OBGYNs
Oh,
use
cool.
as a counseling tool, yeah. So it goes into, like,
We'll put
um
it in the show notes after the fact. I'll have to get that link from you.
yeah, um and so the calculator includes like some demographic information, like your age, your BMI, the number of prior vaginal deliveries and C-sections you've had, the whether or not the indication for the prior C-section was for arrest of labor or arrest of descent, meaning like you pushed and the baby didn't come down, versus like breech, you know, um, and or like non-reassuring fetal heart tracing, which is like why you had your second one,
Yeah.
your baby, yeah, the emergency C-section. And so, I think the questions to ask your doctor, stemming from all this. So one, like, are you comfortable um, with trial of labor after C-section? Is the hospital comfortable with doing this? And then two, what is my predicted chance of a VBAC based on the calculator? And then, even if the calculator says your chances of success are less than 50%, like, it's not that the chances are zero, but there's sort of a low threshold then to move to a C-section if the trial of labor isn't working,
Mhm.
because the longer you labor, the higher the risk the C-section becomes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess one thing that I wasn't totally clear on was, like, at what point do they like, you're just not progressing dilation-wise or the baby's heart rate or, like, all of the above?
Sort of all of the above. I mean, everyone's labor is really different, and so if the baby's acting up, um, then like lower threshold to move to a C-section. Because another thing you have to remember is that every time you have a C-section, there's scar tissue that forms. And like if you do a C-section for the first time, there's no scar tissue. You get the baby out really quickly. But if there's scar tissue from the prior C-section, which you really have no insight to, prior to the repeat C-section, you can injure the bladder, you can injure bowel if you're not taking your time, and if you are trying to get a baby out to save a baby because the baby's heart rate is down, there's risks of injury to those things. And so you just have a lower threshold to tolerate the ups and downs of the baby's heartbeat, um, to try to avoid the complications that can happen from like a emergency C-section.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think it's so interesting how we just wrote an article on, or I just wrote an article on, like, what's the difference between TOLAC versus VBAC. And in my research, I found that 60 to 80% of women who attempt a TOLAC actually go on to have a successful VBAC,
Yeah,
while only 20 to 40% of TOLACs results in another C-section. So, because like you said, if the baby was breached the previous time, that doesn't necessarily mean that your body isn't
and
able to do it, it's just not an option at
right, and
that
just, like,
point.
weren't given the opportunity to even try before, and so there's no reason why you potentially couldn't try, and, in your case where you had a proven pelvis, you delivered a baby vaginally, and then the second, delivery was an emergency that had nothing to do with the failure of the pelvis.
Right.
You were a great candidate to do this. I'm so glad that you
Mhm.
went through with it and that you had success.
Yeah, and again, I can't emphasize enough just, like, finding a provider that, you know like, initially, I had one provider who was, like, totally holding my hand with scheduling that C-section. She's like, "You don't want the unpredictability, let's get a date on the calendar." And then another provider, as I went along in my pregnancy, like, kinda saw that I was moving towards, like, wanting to try the Tolac and kind of led me in that direction and held my hand that way, and, like, at the end of the day, it was, like, 3 days it was, like, 4 days before my C-section, and it could have still gone either way. Like, I think it's important to know, like, you can change your mind too.
Oh, for
Like,
sure.
as it gets closer, like, if I was, like if I had gotten checked at 38 weeks and I was, like, not dilated at all and there was, like, no progression, I would have been totally fine with going with the C-section that Saturday. It was, like, not that it was, like, not a matter of, like, a lot of time. It was just I was kinda ready to go, and it worked out that way. So, anyway, you can change your mind, find a provider that will work with you, and ask all of the questions, so that you have all of the information.
I think also another good point is that choosing what to do can also be influenced by how many more kids that you think that you want. Like
Oh,
once
it's
you've
a really
had
good point.
right, so like once you've had two C-sections, it's still possible to, have a VBAC, but again, the threshold to move to a repeat C-section is lower. But, like, let's say you want 3 kids and this is your second, um, kid, potential C-section. If you have a VBAC for baby number 2, then you're a much higher chance of success for vaginal delivery for baby number 3, and 3 C-sections is just, like, again, the more C-sections you have, the higher risk of the surgery. So, or this is like your potentially third kid sets you up for success for baby number 4 if you want, so it just sets you
So
up
my
for success
doctor
for future
actually asked
things.
me that, like, while I was pushing or, like, in between contractions. She was like we were just talking about how, like, I was like, I couldn't believe I was even in that delivery room, like, having a vaginal birth, and she was like, "Are you done after this?" And I was like I looked at my husband, I was like, "I think so." Like, but she's like, "Well, even if you're not sure, that like, this is a really good thing because if you had a second C-section, then that would increase your risk even more the next time around." So, so yeah, that's a great point.
Own your health. Ask us anything. Your questions and expert answers because you are your own best advocate. Today in Own Your Health, we've got 3 fertility related questions that you've been dying to know more about.
So, Jenna, our listeners want to know how soon can you get pregnant after stopping birth control? I feel like this is like the $1,000,000 question.
For sure. So actually, immediately, everyone's a little bit different on how soon their brain ovary communication really bounces back. And what I mean by that is, so ovulation occurs from meaning releasing of an egg occurs from healthy brain ovary communication. And the way the birth control pills work is they really suppress that brain ovary communication, preventing you from ovulating. And so everyone's a little bit different in how long it takes for that brain ovary communication to be restored after stopping birth control pills. But for some people, it's immediately. And so if you are not trying to get pregnant and you stop the birth control pills, you want to be contracepting in other ways, like with condoms or other methods to prevent pregnancy. But if you are trying to get pregnant, it can happen right away. But for some people, it may take up to 3 months to get a period back after stopping a pill. But if you haven't gotten a period by, but 3 month mark after stopping, that's the point where you want to see your doctor and figure out if there's anything else going on
Yeah.
that the pill is masking.
And I think sometimes people forget because 'cause I've been thinking about this postpartum and even, like, after a miscarriage or, like, you ovulate before you get your period, so you don't actually have to have had a period to get pregnant, right?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
ovulation comes like 2 weeks before a period comes. And so you certainly can ovulate without knowing it and then get pregnant in that ovulation before even having a period after coming off the pill.
that's crazy. As someone who has PCOS and is infertile, that's crazy.
I know. I hear you. Like it as being a fertility doctor, like there's so many things that need to go right in order to get pregnant. And so the fact that that can happen is also is mind blowing. But it
Yeah.
does.
I just got chills because I was just on someone's, like, a Instagram friend's page yesterday, and she just had another failed transfer, and she was like she has 2 kids already, and she was like, "I literally look at them and I'm like, 'How are you here?'" Like, I think about that all the time, like, I went through so many failed transfers and losses before Danny, and I looked at my twins and I'm like, everything had to go right. Like, it's just so crazy.
I
But
agree.
then
I
for
have the
some
chills out too.
people it's like, they don't even get a period back
Yeah,
after the
they
pill. It's
blank,
just
they
like
sneeze.
they sneeze and they're pregnant. Well, okay, so that's really good to know. Um, and then speaking of PCOS, I kinda thought this was a great follow-up because for me, I didn't get my period back after I went off the pill. I had been on the pill for, like, 11 years, um, and it had been 3 months after going off of it, and I still hadn't got my cycle back, and thankfully, my OB/GYN, kinda, like, raised the red flag right away. I got diagnosed with PCOS. I ended up in a fertility clinic, like, before I was even trying. It was, like, a whole thing. So but do irregular periods always mean PCOS?
I love this question because I see so many people with irregular periods and we're just
Mhm.
told that they probably have PCOS without any testing. And so while PCOS is the most common cause of irregular periods, it's certainly not the only cause. And so I think of a period as sort of like a vital sign telling you that the health of the brain ovary communication or the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis is healthy. And so every month, the brain sends a signal to the ovary to grow an egg. And the signal is just strong enough to get one egg to grow. And the ovary responds by growing this one egg. And then when the egg gets big enough and their hormone levels are high, the brain then sends another signal to the ovary to ovulate or release this egg. And that second signal is called the LH surge, which I'm sure a lot of people listening have heard about. This is what you can actually detect on this ovulation predictor kit. And so, irregular menses is a sign of failed communication between the brain and the ovary. And this can be due to issues with the brain actually sending the signal, like something called functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is like an energy imbalance. Often we see this in patients with eating disorders. Um, Also, issues with the thyroid and elevated prolactin. So, prolactin is milk hormone, and that's sort of why you don't get a period or can have irregular periods when you're breastfeeding. Then a rare cause of failure of the signal to be sent is like a brain mass. And then there's issues with the ovary not responding to the signal. So, like ovarian resistance, and this could be due to PCOS, issues with the adrenal gland, and then also
That's me.
yeah, and then, also premature ovarian insufficiency or premature ovarian failure, and so there's, like, this whole big differential, and through hormone testing and ultrasound evaluation, we can sort of sort through what we think is going on with the patient, and it's important to do this because related the treatment to get a period back or to allow you to become pregnant is different depending on which diagnosis you have.
Which one was the hypothalamic amenorrhea? That's the one where the brain
The
doesn't
brain isn't sending the signal, so,
okay, and
you
then
know,
with
what
PCOS, it's the
yeah.
ovary not receiving the signal. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
Those are probably the 2 most common ones that I see,
Okay.
um, but they're very different in terms of their treatment, like, for fertility,
Totally.
if you have, hypothalamic amenorrhea or dysfunctional hypothalamic amenorrhea, you won't respond to oral ovulation induction agents like letrozole versus
Okay.
um, with PCOS, you just need this oral pill, letrozole, to grow an egg and ovulate to help you get pregnant.
So what is the treatment for HA?
So, you can so they need, injectable gonadotropins. So,
Okay.
you know, fixing the underlying problem, sometimes gaining weight, changing diet, that can take a really long time,
Mhm.
and doesn't get even if you gain weight back, doesn't mean that your periods are gonna go back to normal. And so
Yeah.
they really need injectable gonadotropins, so FSH and LH hormones to help grow the egg. And that can either be in the form of um, like low dose to get 1 or 2 eggs to grow, and then combining that with timed intercourse or inseminations versus going straight to IVF.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I would say most people go to IVF because it's really hard to titrate the injectable medications to get the 1 or 2 eggs to grow. Often, even if you give like a low dose, you get like 4, 5, 6
Yeah,
eggs
yeah,
to
yeah.
grow. And then you like end up in the octomom situation, which you don't want. It is certainly possible. I've had patients who, really want to try and do without IVF and just take the low dose meds and get 1 or 2 eggs to grow. But
Mhm.
it can it can be hard and end up, you could end up canceling some cycles just because too many eggs grow at once.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I did not know that, back when, and after I had a couple of failed letrozole and Clomid cycles, we tried that, and I didn't have HA, I have PCOS, but I way too many follicles grew and ended up with failed cycle, and I just wish someone had told me at that point, like, "IVF is probably your best option at this point," because it was, like, a grueling cycle. It was, like, so it was so measured because, like, they just didn't want too many follicles to grow and then too
Yeah,
many
you're going in
follicles
for more
grew.
visits, and then,
Yeah.
for the patient, it's so frustrating. Like like waste, like had this whole cycle and then having it be canceled. And then for me to have to tell someone, we're gonna have to cancel your cycle because there's too many eggs growing. It's too high risk. Like that's crushing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's hard.
Agree. Women's Health in the Wild, must reads, must sees, and must tries for your wellness journey. So, current events. I know we don't want to get political, but there's been kind of a scary trend with reproductive health information disappearing from the internet. And it's really affecting how women are able to make decisions about their bodies. Knowledge is power. And, reproductiverights.gov was recently removed, along with other key resources that helped patients and providers stay informed. So, um, we wanted to talk about like how to stay in the loop and make sure you're still getting accurate info. Obviously, Rescripted is a great resource if I do say so myself. We have a recent article listing some of the resources that you can tap into with websites like reproductiverights.gov no longer being available. Obviously, Planned Parenthood is still a go-to reproductive health access project, the Guttmacher Institute, right? So anyway, all those are listed on our website, and we'll also put them in the show notes, but wanted to get your take, Jen, on, like, how all these changes are impacting your patients and kind of you as a provider.
So I'm so glad that we're talking about this because yes, it is really scary when things start disappearing from the internet. I really get all of my information from the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, ASRM, and also the American College of OBGYN, or ACOG. And they have also, you can access fertility and reproductive information easily on their websites. And then I really love the article that you guys publish with all those resources. I use bedsider.org a lot, and that was
Oh,
on
can
your
you tell us
website.
a little about that?
Yeah, so it's a really patient friendly interface to understand more about contraception, fertility treatments. There's lots of really good pictures on there. I've been using that website since I was in residency, actually. So I was really
Oh,
happy
amazing.
to
This
see
was
that.
actually the first time I had heard about it, but as someone who went to my 6-week appointment and had to be, like, debriefed on all the birth control options, I was like, "Why do I not know this?"
Yeah, I think that where this the taking information off the internet is really most harmful to patients. because who are looking to get some good information. I think as a provider, I luckily have some insight into where to get um, information that is not controlled by the government, at least not yet, thankfully. Um, and so if you have questions about where to safely get information, aside from the Rescripted website and the websites that were posted on that in that article, then asking your OBGYN is a great place also to start.
Absolutely, and we love ASRM and ACOG. A lot of our articles are based on their guidelines, so, always check those out too, but you're right, like, have an honest conversation with your provider. I mean, my doctor, like, sat with me for 15 minutes talking about birth control options at my 6-week postpartum visit, and I, like, for the women's health company like, I still had questions, so, yeah, it's so important.
Yeah.
Specifically IUDs, I was like, "I don't know enough about this option."
For sure, and, like, you can hear like, you can talk to friends and, like, read things on Reddit or online or wherever you get information from, but everybody, has different priorities when it comes to selecting a birth control method, and it's different weight like, one, they have, like, different background health risk, they have, they experience their menstrual cycles in different ways and have desires to experience their menstrual cycle in other ways than other people, and so choosing a birth control pill is a really, like, personal choice that I think really needs to have some guidance from an OB/GYN to walk you through those different,
Totally.
like, pros and cons.
My question is always, like, "Is this pill gonna give me acne, or is this the pill that helps with acne?" Because like, with PCOS, that's, like,
A big one,
a
yeah.
bad combination. Well, awesome. Well, what like, I guess, as a last question, like, what do you think, the future implications are for women's health? Like, where do you see this going? Or, like, are you hopeful that there's always going to be information that people can access with, organizations like ACOG and ASRM?
Yeah, I mean, ASRM and ACOG are not going anywhere, and there's, like, a really strong foundation there. Um, I think that the internet can be a pretty scary place, and certain things can be censored and removed from the internet. And so, what you see, the content that you see, could be really like curated by the powers that be, which can be really
Oh, yeah.
scary.
We just wrote an article about shadow banning, and how, like, certain, like, I think it was Hey Jane, they're, like, an abortion pill website, like, they were completely, like, shadow banned from Instagram from Meta, like, it's crazy, so, yeah, you're right, 100%, like, you never know where that information is gonna go, so you have to kinda do digging on your own.
Right, or, like and asking your doctor, really, like, sending them a every like, all these offices have portals now, like, sending a portal message, like, "Hey, what's a good resource for me to be looking at?" Or, "Can you send me some resources on X, Y, and Z?" Because, there are some things that require, like, membership, like, certain details within ASRM and ACOG. There's a lot of really good patient,
Oh, okay.
friendly information that they post on their websites, but if you want some more details or articles, like, that's a good thing to ask your doctor for.
Yeah, and if you are getting your information on the internet, like, through TikTok or wherever, it's like, just make sure you vet it with your doctor and, like, check
Oh
your
my
sources,
gosh,
because
yes.
there's just so much misinformation and disinformation out there, and
Preach.
when it comes to our bodies, we do not want that, and, that's why at Rescripted, we're always making sure we're science-backed and working with our medical advisors, and, we're not going anywhere either, so, really
Okay.
hopeful for the future, as long as, you know, people are still out there fighting the good fight. So, well, thanks, Jenna. This was wonderful, and I'm so happy that we're back and excited for the rest of the season.
Likewise.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in to From First Period to Last Period. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our future conversations.
And don't forget to share this with your friends, because when it comes to women's health, we all deserve to be informed, empowered, and supported.
Still have questions? Email community@rescripted.com for a chance to have yours answered on a future episode. For more science-backed women's health content that meets you exactly where you are, head to rescripted.com or follow us on social at Hello Rescripted.
We'll see you next time with more real stories and expert advice.